revealing the handling of the Lop Nor duplicate incident by Bureau. File number is 1979-0308. File name, the Lop Nor clone event. File level is top secret. The duplicate man. They were first discovered in Lop Nor, Xinjiang in 1960 Jan-2. It has been confirmed that the production of clones is caused by a jade pendant with 2 fish carved on it, under specific conditions, a supernatural phenomenon. The items replicated by the twin fish jade pendant are no different in appearance and essence from the original. Reports show that, in the Lop Nor area in recent years, many strange creatures have been discovered, including mutated animals and plants, and unnamed new organisms. Professor Peng led a scientific expedition team to the Lop Nor area for an exploration mission. After discovering a ruin on the way, they encountered a series of mysterious events. After assessment by Bureau 749, Professor Peng's trip to Lop Nor had a strong purpose, and it was not ruled out that it was just a biological survey to prevent problems before they happen. The Bureau decided to intervene in this exploration and sent official members to participate. During the journey, the scientific expedition team obtained many biological samples and gained a lot, including the death flower that has always been in legend. Physical samples. During this period, Professor Peng left a note and then disappeared mysteriously, and disappeared without a trace. During the search for Professor Peng, 2 students died strangely. Their bodies were empty shells without flesh. In addition, 2 students had strange changes in their spirits and looks, and suspected to be possessed. Here are the detailed records of this file. The mission description is very simple. Our leader is a professor surnamed Peng. We were to follow his research team to conduct biological research in Lop Nor, Xinjiang. According to the file, after the nuclear test in Lop Nor, there have been Qimiao changes. It used to be a Gobi desert, but now there are various plants and even animals. These plants and animals seem to be different from normal ones, and new species have also appeared. It is suspected that it is due to nuclear radiation that caused the variation. That is why this biological research action was carried out. From the archives, Professor Peng should be the top biology professor in the pyramid. But what puzzles me is that, just a biological research operation, is it necessary for the 749 Bureau to participate? If it is really to ensure safety, the ordinary army would be enough. However, in this operation, 2 squads of soldiers did participate. After reading the mission file, Fatih Liu obviously wasn't reassured either. Let me tell you, Comrade Xiao Wu boss, Lin must be up to no good. 2 squads with 20 soldiers. This is definitely not a small operation. Actually, I felt the same way. So I went to Lin Zhen's office with Liu Pengzi to ask him for the truth. As we entered, Lin Zhen was crossing his legs and said lazily, "Here you are." I knew it. "You must come to me." I said, "Lin, what is the matter?" "You don't need to hide it from us," Liu Pengzi asked directly. Lin Zhen put down his legs and sat up straight and handed us another document. I exchanged a glance with Liu Pengzi. We opened the file, the first sentence on it, which shocked us, because the first sentence usually is the goal of the task. It was written like this: "Pay attention to Professor Peng's every move. If anything unusual happens, deal with it immediately." The immediate handling here, Liu Pengzi and I both knew what it meant, which means to eliminate him. We continue to read. As we read, we broke out in a cold sweat, because it was too incredible. According to the records, this is not the first time Professor Peng has entered Lop. Before that, he had already entered twice to wipe it out. The first time was indeed a common biological exploration, to see how the animals and plants survived, the vitality of animals and plants, and whether there were any varieties worth cultivating. But this operation had an unexpected outcome. The team unexpectedly discovered in Lop Nor, an ancient site. Finally, the team immediately reported to the local cultural relics and cultural relic staff. After some investigation, they concluded that this site is likely to be the ruins of the ancient Lulan kingdom. Originally, this matter had nothing to do with the biological team. They were also continuing their own mission, but all the team members, including Professor Peng, all experienced an abnormality. When they dreamed at night, would dream of the ruins of Lulan kingdom, and had a strong desire to go there. Professor Peng thought there was something strange. Dreaming is normal, but everyone had the same dream. It was very problematic. As a researcher, he would not miss any suspicious place, so he led the scientific expedition team back to the Lulan ruins. When he arrived, he was stunned by the scene in front of him. The colleagues who were with him saw this scene, also screamed, because the archaeological team that should work here The archaeological team that was supposed to work had turned into two, and they were exactly the same. Simply put, everyone had become two people. Professor Peng and his colleagues were very surprised. They quickly entered the ruins. They approached and saw, sure enough, everyone had become two, and they were exactly the same. The most terrifying thing is that these two identical people seemed to have fully accepted each other's existence. They seemed to be completely indifferent, or a sense of unconsciousness. But if you ask them questions, they would answer calmly and fluently, and their answers are almost the same. This shows that they are highly cognitively similar. Professor Peng knew something extraordinary must have happened here. So Professor Peng could only order his team to evacuate immediately, to camp outside the Lulan ruins. Professor Peng wanted to contact for help, but in that era, the communication was poor, and in the desert, there was no signal at all. So Professor Peng drove a car alone. He drove towards the nearest city to Lop Nur to seek help. When Professor Peng led the rescue team returned to Lop Nur, 3 days had passed. This was a rescue team composed of local troops, with high quality and had a lot of experience in desert rescue. But when they arrived at the Lop Nur, they were all shocked, because not only the original archaeological team, but also Professor Peng's students and team had entered the ruins, but also two people. There were also many unfamiliar people. Judging from their clothes, they should be local residents, but they didn't know why they came. Maybe they came to rescue, or maybe they were attracted here. But they all turned into two people. However, the state of these people in front of us, it doesn't seem that there is any danger. They are all busy in an orderly manner. They seem to be rearranging the Lulan ruins, but the problem is that the archaeologists know what to do. How could ordinary people know these? Although they seem to be out of danger now, but one person becomes two people. This fact does exist. Things are so weird. Whether to save or not becomes a question. If they go to rescue, what strange things might happen if they don't rescue? After all, there are so many lives. The commander of the last operation gritted his teeth. He gave the order, quickly broke into the Lulan ruins, to rescue people and retreat as soon as possible. However, when the soldiers entered the Lulan ruins to rescue people, those people still refused to leave, and the soldiers couldn't force them to leave. While the two sides were confronting each other, a strange thing happened. Beside a soldier, another soldier suddenly appeared. The two soldiers were identically equipped, dressed, and looked, in short, in front of everyone. One soldier turned into two. The commander was terrified. He shouted, ordered all the soldiers to leave the Lulan ruins. Some soldiers ran out, but some soldiers, before escaping, completed the replication and stayed in the Lulan ruins and started working silently. The commander couldn't control the situation, and he had no right to deal with it anymore. So he immediately contacted the superior for instructions. So, the matter was officially handed over to the Bureau for handling. The team leader was the first team of the Bureau 749. On their way to the scene, the commander of Lop Nur spread the soldiers apart and set up camp. First to monitor the Lulan ruins, and the second was to see if they could rescue. But with the Qianche Zhijian of Professor Peng's students, this time they pulled their station further away, but accidents still happened. The soldiers in the station were also replicated, and then entered the Lulan ruins without looking back. According to the soldiers who were not replicated, they dreamed at night. They always dreamed that they entered the Lulan ruins. When the first team of Bureau 749 arrived, the situation had gotten out of control. The civilians living further away were also replicated and joined the work in the Lulan ruins. The army stationed on the periphery said that many soldiers in their army were also replicated, and they felt that the influence of the ruins was gradually expanding. So in recent days, they have been constantly moving outward. Even so, more and more soldiers left the team and went to the Lulan ruins. At that time, the captain of the 70-4-9th 1st Detachment went to the scene. As soon as he arrived within the range of the ruins, he felt that inside the ruins, or the underground of the Lulan ruins, there was a huge energy fluctuation. As for what it was, he couldn't be sure, but one thing is certain. This thing was particularly dangerous, and it was constantly developing. The squad leader just tried to enter, and his body immediately reacted. It is worth mentioning that this squad leader also has supernatural abilities. Highest ability is very special, which is the sensing ability. The stronger the ability, the greater his physical reaction was. And at this time, as soon as he entered the ruins, his body began to twitch uncontrollably. This was the first time he had encountered this reaction, so he immediately reported the actual situation to headquarters, and classified the danger as S-Jian level. Because of its great uncertainty and growth, if left unchecked, the impact may become wider and wider, and it will be difficult it is hard to find a suitable solution. The key is that no one knows how big the Lulan ruins are. Finally, after careful consideration, decided to destroy the entire area. It was like cutting off the root of the problem. There was no other way. There was an important experiment at that time, lacking a site. So the upper level carefully considered, decided to conduct the experiment in La Punur, with a huge mushroom cloud rising. The Lulan ruins, the replicas, and the human body all disappeared. The Lopner returned to tranquility. The power of the nuclear bomb is unquestionable. It is almost certain that the Lulan ruins no longer exist, but unfortunately, the records about the Lulan ruins, cultural relics and people were buried in the explosion. So the Lulan ruins will remain a mystery forever. After reading this document, I probably understand why we were asked to participate in this operation. Because the Lulan ruins was accidentally discovered by Professor Peng's team. Later, among these people, only Professor Peng came back from Lopnor, so he is suspected. But over the years, Professor Peng sighed. There have been our people monitoring him, but he didn't show any abnormality. He still conducts research and teaches every day. But this time when he went to Lopner to study biology, he proposed it. Although many strange species did appear there, but combined with his special experience, we had to think the worst, actually. Whether the current Professor Peng is the real one, whether he is a replica or not, this speculation is too bold. But after careful consideration, it is not impossible, because the first people who entered the Lulan ruins have all died. Only Professor Peng came back. If it was his clone who came back, the original body has died in Lopner. It is impossible to verify. With these questions, we set off. According to the plan, this mission was led by me. Liu Pengzi and Wan Feng led the team. In the hotel, I finally met Professor Peng. Professor Peng's team has a total of 5 people except him. The remaining 4 were his students and assistants. There were 2 men and 2 women, all college students. In that era, college students were definitely treasures. The 2 male students are Lu Kai and Wang Shengda. They were both talkative, and seemed to have good personalities. Your 2 students are Xia Lanying and Zhou Shengnan. Obviously they are not weak little girls. I guess they often participated in field experiments. Then I also went with the scientific expedition team. The soldiers from the 2 classes, I met them. The 2 leaders were the squad leaders. Both came from the engineering corps. They were familiar with scientific expeditions, since I was responsible for the safety work this time. So the 2 squad leaders gave me the command without hesitation. As for Professor Peng, I didn't see any other problems with him. The next morning, our group of 10 vehicles, and set off in a mighty manner. I always kept an eye on Professor Peng's car, because they were leading the way. I don't know how they determined the destination. Could the destination be the Lulan ruins? While I was thinking, the car in front suddenly braked sharply. I also quickly stepped on the brakes, and quickly jumped out of the car to be on guard. Because the sudden brake often represents the approach of danger. I saw in the desert basin ahead, there were white skulls all over the mountains and plains, with empty eyes, staring straight at us. The number was countless. With so many skulls, with empty eye sockets, staring at us, I couldn't help but feel a chill. With so many skulls, how many people must have died? Suddenly, I had an idea. Could the owners of these skulls we're the people who entered the Lulan ruins? Thinking carefully, it didn't seem right. Those who were in the center of the nuclear explosion shouldn't have any bones left. Even if they survived, there should be bones from other parts. But all the bones here are skulls. The 2 female college students were scared out of their wits. The accompanying staff even vomited on the spot. Only we soldiers were relatively calm. Of course, Professor Peng was also calm. I quietly moved behind Professor Peng, and then I turned on the safety and opened it. If he moved, I would definitely kill him instantly. However, Professor Peng didn't do anything unusual. He adjusted his glasses and said in a very serious tone, "This is not a skull, but a flower, called gulan. It is precisely because this flower resembles a human skull that it got this name. However, this flower is very rare. Legend has it that it only grows in places full of death. It can grow, so it is also called the flower of death." Then Professor Peng introduced the currently known where the death flower has ever appeared. One is in Verdun, where the Battle of Verdun once took place. Millions of people died here. The other is the Valley of Death in the Kunlun Mountains. All kinds of animals died here, including humans. The total number is probably hundreds of millions. But now this flower has actually bloomed in Lopner. This means that so many people have died in Lopner. It is said that this flower looks like a skull. There is nothing special about it, but this is a rare opportunity. There are no samples of death flower in China. So Duanfeng was very excited to collect it. I also picked up a flower to examine. Sure enough, the petals are round, with 3 petals in a flower. The gaps between the petals outline the skull, eyes and mouth. From a distance it does look like a skull. The death flower is just an episode, but I always felt it was a sign, indicating that this operation may not be so smooth. Sure enough, when we camped at night, an assistant staff was bitten by a venomous snake. Although we also carried snake venom serum, but this venomous snake should have mutated, and its toxicity had changed. But the serum was useless. Within half an hour, the staff member bled to death from all 7 orifices. Everyone mourned for the deceased, and buried him on the spot. The next 2 days operation went smoothly, and there were no too dangerous things along the way, except for 2 desert scorpions. It is normal to have scorpions in the desert, but these scorpions were really too big. They were almost as big as Lu's head. Being stung by this scorpion, it would be a disaster. But this scorpion was not so lucky. It was directly killed, and made into a specimen, and became a research object. Besides animals, I also gained some other mutated plants these days. There are several kinds, even Professor Duanfeng and Peng have never seen. It was a fruitful harvest. On the 3rd day, a strong wind blew in the desert, forming a very violent sandstorm. The team couldn't move at all. We discussed and decided to set up camp here first, and relied on tents and cars to temporarily avoid the storm. Unexpectedly, the storm lasted for a very long time, and it didn't stop for a day and a night. I went out of the tent to have a look. The storm was really too strong. The wind carried sand, hitting me like being stabbed by a knife. I had to return to the tent immediately. Seeing me enter the tent, everyone looked at me with a questioning look. I shook my head, indicating that the situation was still not optimistic. But the good news is that our water and food are still sufficient. But if the storm lasts too long, it will be very troublesome. And at this moment, the tent was suddenly lifted. Zhou Shengnan rushed in very panicked. She said in a panic that Professor Peng was missing, and couldn't find him anywhere, and a note was found in his tent. Damn, I couldn't help. I cursed. I never thought that in such a stormy weather, Professor Peng could still move. I angrily opened the note, and read the content on it, and I couldn't help cursing again. I found it. You all go back. Don't go any further, and don't try to find me. All you can find is just the yellow sand. To be honest, after reading the note, I really regretted not killing him sooner. Now he has gone missing without a trace. I lifted the tent, and rushed towards Professor Peng's tent. I quickly opened Professor Peng's tent. His 2 students, Lu Kai and Wang Shang, were inside. They also lived in the tent with Professor Peng, and at this time they were also a little at a loss. I checked this tent. There was nothing special, but there was one strange thing. When Professor Peng was leaving, he didn't take his sleeping bag. It was such a bad weather outside, without a sleeping bag, which means he wasn't afraid of the weather at all. I also checked the drinking water and food. Professor Peng did take some, but it was definitely not enough to support him for long. It seems that his destination is nearby. Fortunately, we brought military telegrams this time. Through the relay, I immediately contacted Captain Lin Zhen. Our superiors asked us to protect the safety of the staff, and try to bring Professor Peng back or deal with him. I discussed with Liu Pengzi. We decided to have a squad of soldiers escort the staff and the student team evacuated first, then the remaining soldiers follow us to carry out the search. But unexpectedly, the 4 students also refused to leave. According to their thoughts, the teacher was missing now. They must find the teacher. Finally, we could only have a squad of soldiers escort them, the rest of the staff evacuated, and take the samples back. The rest of us stayed here, search for Professor Peng. I tossed and turned at night. I rarely dream, but I actually started dreaming. I dreamed that I was in a prosperous city, which was obviously ancient and exotic, and very exotic. I don't know where it is, but one thing is certain, it was not a modern city. There are camels on the streets of the city, horses and various small stalls selling all kinds of strange things. The appearance of these people is also very interesting. Obviously not Han people. They look a bit like Uyghurs, but not exactly the same. In the middle of the city, there is a magnificent palace. At the top of the palace, there is always a brilliant light shining. I don't know what rare treasure it is. At this time the crowd suddenly walked towards the palace, with very pious expressions. I grabbed someone and asked what was going on. The person told me, Today is the day of pilgrimage, to express our most sincere blessings, to express the most sincere blessings and loyalty. The next second, my body involuntarily joined the crowd and moved towards the palace together. When we reached the gate of the palace, people knelt down one after another, murmuring words, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. I don't know why. I also had this idea in my mind. I want to kneel down. I want to be reincarnated. When I was struggling between kneeling and not kneeling, my knee seemed to twist, which was very painful. This made me wake up. I looked around. It was pitch black, but I could still see the outlines of Liu Pengzi and Duanfang. I breathed a sigh of relief. What a strange dream. The next morning, I looked outside the tent. The storm seemed to have stopped. It seems that today we can act. Liu Pengzi stretched and walked to my side, and started to say something inappropriate. Said Xiao Wu, do you know what dream I had last night? I dreamed that I went to a very exotic country, and I met the queen of that country. The queen was so beautiful. Hearing what Liu Pengzi said, I got goosebumps. I instinctively asked, did you go on a pilgrimage with a group of people, and the person you worshipped was the queen? Liu Pengzi was stunned when he heard that. Yeah, how did you know? I didn't tell you. Now I remembered a detail. The army stationed near the Lulan ruins, and Professor Pengol had dreams about, wanted to enter the Lulan ruins, or had a strong desire. And now, the exotic country we dreamed of, be the Lulan. I quickly rushed to Duanfang. I asked him if he had the same dream, and got a positive answer. Finally, I went to ask everyone in the camp one by one, and the answers were all affirmative. A group of people had the same dream at the same time. The plot characters were the same. However, one thing worth noting is that they didn't find each other in their dreams, which means their dreams were different. After investigation, it was found that after I woke them up forcibly, their dreams didn't last long. They mainly followed the pilgrims to kneel and wait for the queen, and waited for the queen to appear. This dream is definitely not simple. Everyone in the camp had the same dream, which means the strength of the other party is unfathomable. I can't wait any longer. I immediately ordered the first squad leader to immediately send the ordinary staff and specimens to the base camp immediately. And I went to find the 4 college students, and wanted to have a good talk with them, and persuade them to return. Just as I walked into the tent where they were, I was stunned by the weird scene in front of me. 2 men, Lu Kai and Wang Shengde, were kneeling in front of Zhou Shengnan and Xia Lanying, shouting loudly that they were willing to dedicate themselves. And Zhou Shengnan and Xia Lanying, 2 girls, also looked very dull, but they sat on the stool, seemed to be full of dignity. The next second, Lu Kai and Wang Shengde actually started to kowtow. It felt the same as in a dream. The same kneeling posture, and same devotion. I immediately walked forward, and pulled them up with one hand, but found that their weight became very light. On closer inspection, they were both bleeding from their 7 orifices. I shouted quickly. Liu Pengzi and Duanfang rushed in immediately. Seeing the 2 bleeding from their 7 orifices, they were stunned. Then they immediately found a medic to try to save them. The bleeding couldn't be stopped. Soon the 2 boys died. I picked up the 2 people, which shocked Liu Pengzi. I said, Xiao Wu, when did you become so strong? Liu Pengzi, take out your trident. Watch over these 2 girls, and don't let them run away. If there is a problem, just kill them. At this moment I was filled with murderous intent, and was very angry. Seeing my expression, Liu Pengzi didn't say anything. He silently took out the trident. He watched the 2 girls, but the 2 girls didn't do anything. Except for their expressions that were slightly eased, there was no other abnormality. I continued to carry the 2 boys' corpses out. It is not that I'm strong, but the 2 boys were too light now, as if their bodies had been hollowed out. I found an empty tent. I called Duanfang in, and dissected them. Duanfang glanced at me, and didn't refute, and started to operate silently, Duanfang is a biologist, and humans are also part of the biological category. Anatomy was not difficult for him. Lu Kai's abdomen was gently cut open. It was obvious that there was almost no flesh under the skin. It can be understood that the skin directly wraps the bones and internal organs. After opening the heart, the muscles inside also disappeared. Only a shriveled shell remained. Finally, the head was opened. The brain was obviously dehydrated. Only some blood stains, and the brain tissue had long disappeared. This feeling, it feels like someone has sucked out all their life essence. All sucked out. This method reminds me of the Japanese Demon Island. Because after the Dongying Demon Island incident, many dead soldiers were found, only leaving an empty shell. Their flesh and blood disappeared. It should be absorbed by the Japanese island. Things finally became troublesome. I sighed. walked out of the tent, and returned to the tent where the two girls were. As soon as I entered, I seemed to feel something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I focused my attention on the faces of the two girls. I always felt that their faces seemed to have undergone some subtle changes. I quickly asked Liu Pengzi, "Don't you think there is something different?" "Have changed a little." Pengzi walked over casually and took a closer look. "They don't look as good as yesterday. Have you not rested well recently?" I was speechless. Just then Duanfeng also walked in. I xickly asked Duanfeng the same question. Duanfeng is a biologist and a very rigorous person. He looked carefully. Zhou Shengnan's eyes seemed to be a little bigger, and Xia Leining's lips seemed to be thinner. Duanfeng gave biological insights, but it was the same as my observation. We're the same. The appearance of these two girls have indeed undergone slight changes. At this time, the two girls seemed to have regained their sanity. They both stood up and looked confused. I asked them a few questions and found that they really didn't know anything. They didn't remember what happened just now. They just felt that for a moment, they were the ones who dominated the world, as if they were ancient kings. The word king stimulated my nerves. I pulled Zhou Shengnan over. I picked up a piece of cloth, covering his nose and below. Then I said to Liu Pengzi and Duanfeng to see if they had any impression. Liu Pengzi and Duanfeng both widened their eyes. It felt very similar to the queen in my dream. Hearing their answers, my hand unconsciously reached for the gun at my waist, and Liu Pengzi's reaction was even more intense. He directly took out his gun, pointing at the two girls. Although the two girls didn't know what was going on, but saw the black muzzles pointed at them, and seeing my serious expression, they were all panicked. At this moment, Liu Pengzi had already turned on the safety of the gun, which meant he was really ready to shoot at any time. My heart was also in turmoil. Shooting would solve all problems, to eliminate a hidden danger in advance. At this special time, they have changed like this. It can be judged that there is danger, so killing them at this time would not violate the discipline of Bureau 749. But in the end, I gently pressed the trigger of Liu Pengzi. I walked up to the two girls and forced a smile. I comforted them and said, "Don't worry, we won't hurt you. But if you find anything unusual, you must tell us in time." It was getting dark. I knew it was time to deal with the situation here. Late at night, the two girls had fallen asleep, and I also activated my ability early and began to capture spiritual power in all directions. Suddenly, a very strong mental power was sensed by me. I could feel very clearly where the mental power was coming from. It was under our camp in front of us. I checked the coordinates and confirmed the location. This location is definitely not the location where the Lulan ruins appeared, which was more than 10 kilometers off. According to the data at that time, at this distance, should not be affected by the Lulan ruins. But another thought suddenly came to my mind. What if the Lulan ruins discovered at that time was just the tip of the iceberg, and the real center is here? Then everything made sense. Duanfeng also understood that I had found the location, so he directly found the squad leader and brought the soldiers here. Finally, 5 soldiers were left to guard the camp. As a backup, the remaining 5 soldiers followed us to explore. As for Zhou Shengnan and Xia Laining, they must follow us. I'm absolutely worried they would disappear from my sight again. Although it is night now, but the moon in the desert is bright and round. There is no problem in moving. 2 kilometers is nothing at all. We arrived almost instantly. I observed that the terrain here is very wide, giving a sense of endlessness, but it also has very distinct characteristics, because the death flower appeared here again. Although its scale is much smaller than what we met before, but we almost never encountered it later. The appearance of the death flower again, its reappearance is an anomaly, proving that we should be here. So we started to search nearby. About 30 meters away from us, there was a very huge stone about 30 meters away, half buried in the soil, which looked like a marker. I took out the dry air on my back and climbed up the rock. The touch of this rock was very strange. Normally, in the desert at night, the temperature drops very quickly. The stone should be very cold, but as soon as I climbed up, I felt that the rock was very warm, and it wasn't rough. I observed carefully. On the top of the rock, there are traces of artificial grinding. Obviously, if there is an entrance, it should be here. I turned on my flashlight and started to feel around, trying to find the entrance. But after more than 10 minutes, I still found nothing. At this time, Liu Pengzi also climbed up. He kicked me as soon as he climbed up. I said, "Comrade Wu, everyone is waiting. Did you find it?" Liu Pengzi smiled and then sat down on a nearby stone. The stone sank down with a click, Finally, a hole the size of a person appeared behind the stone. Liu Pangzi looked at the hole in astonishment, and then looked back at me. I said I was brave. Do you believe it? Yes, I said with gritted teeth, looking at the dark hole. I called the soldiers and the two girls up, and told them that this was our destination. This time I didn't choose to go in first, but let Liu go first. Liu Pangzi looked at me silently, but didn't object, but his small eyes were full of resentment. Liu Pangzi took out his trident and poked it into the hole. There was no response, so he began to cautiously enter the cave. I followed closely behind, keeping a safe distance, and be able to respond at any time. I led the two girls behind me, so that if they have any reactions or movements, I can also deal with them in time. The last one was the monitor, and we also left two soldiers on top, just in case. We walked down the passage. For about 5 minutes, a bright gate appeared in front of us. Yes, this is the gate of the palace in my dream. There were also statues of snakes on both sides. I raised the dry lacquer shield and found two more soldiers, but the three of us couldn't push it open. I was hesitating whether to use a high-gen explosive grenade. When I was about to blow up the door, Fatih Liu spoke again. I said, Comrade Wu, why don't you learn your lesson? If brute force can open the door, Professor Peng would not have been able to enter. If he used explosives, we would definitely hear it at such a close distance. So only a special person can open this door. Think about who among us is the most special. I looked at Xia Laning and Zhou Shengnan. If anyone is the most special now, it must be these two girls according to our speculation. They are the queens and their clones. Then this palace should be their home. Open the door and go home. Isn't it the most normal thing? The two girls took a deep breath and walked to the door. They pushed the door with all their strength, with a creak, and the door was pushed open a crack. I gave Liu Pangzi a look, and he immediately understood. He went ahead and I followed. W flashed into the crack. I thought there would be darkness behind the door, or even just dirt, but it wasn't the case. After entering, I found that there was a view, which means there is a light source here. I looked up. There was a starry sky above my head. Although the stars were sparse, but they still emitted a faint light, which illuminated this mysterious area. At this moment I suddenly remembered the story told by Lin Zheng in the tomb of Qin Shi Huang. There is also a galaxy of pearls. Then it is very likely that, just as we were about to set off, I subconsciously glanced at Xia Laning and Zhou Shengnan. I found that their faces had changed slightly again. Although it was very small, they still couldn't escape my eyes. The next passage is actually like a corridor, which is very narrow, just like a general ancient tomb. On both sides of the corridor, there are also some murals. I carefully observed these murals. I found that the murals here are not a coherent story, but more like a record of national characteristics. The first mural shows two big snakes pulling a chariot, but this time, the queen was not alone in the carriage. Obviously, a man was in the car with the queen, and the two seem to be leaning on each other. Although the expressions on the murals are unclear, but at this time the queen should just be an ordinary woman, and traveling with her beloved, if there is such a person, who desires the queen's resurrection. It is likely that this man, now there is a man who is not afraid of danger, and goes through all kinds of difficulties, to reach and enter this ruins, although I also think it is a bit risky, but it is not impossible. What if Professor Peng is this person? That would be really troublesome. Love is the strangest thing in the world. Some people dare to fight against the world for love. The content of the second mural surprised me even more. The scene depicted in this mural is, two people are kneeling before one person, and these two people are the queen and her lover who appeared earlier, and the other person is a mysterious man, wearing a black robe, whose face is not visible, but someone with such a noble status as the queen also kneels before him very devoutly. Obviously this mysterious man is not a common person but someone above the queen. The third mural has no human figures, is completely filled with various animals, including a big snake, a scorpion, and a death flower, and several other creatures I don't know. The fourth mural shows the queen standing alone on a high platform, worshipped by thousands. The fifth mural is still the queen, with 1,000,000 troops behind her, and magical animals to help. This scene is obviously against something. It should be a war. As for the result of the war, it is not mentioned in the mural. The mural ended. There is another door. According to inference, it should be the position of the main hall. On the high platform in the center of the hall, there is an exquisite phoenix chair, which obviously belongs to the queen. While I was studying this chair, Zhou Shengnan suddenly walked over silently. I suddenly had a strong desire. I wanted to sit here. I glanced at Zhou Shengnan, and then looked at Xia Laning, but she didn't respond. At this moment, I guessed who was the original. Who was the original and who was the copy? After thinking for a long time, I decided to let Zhou Shengnan sit in this chair, to see what would happen. Meanwhile, I took the single horned fat man and the trident. Ready to act, Zhou Shengnan sat on the chair carefully. When her body touched the chair, her body suddenly became stiff, and her eyes became dull. Finally, Zhou Shengnan said in an ethereal voice, "Welcome to Lulan and my country. You two are very strange. I always feel that I have some connection with you." After saying this, Zhou Shengnan looked at me with a dull gaze. Looked at me and Liu Pengzi. Liu Pengzi and I also looked at each other. We were very nervous. This is obviously the Queen of Lulan. Kill her to end it all. We must not let this mysterious queen come back to life. I made up my mind to qi and slashed at Zhou Shengnan's head with a big axe. It is useless to destroy this body. I will find a more suitable body. Zhou Shengnan's ethereal voice reached my ears. I was shocked. I used all my strength to stabilize it. The axe didn't fall. I don't know if my decision is right. Moreover, I couldn't tell if what the queen said was true or not. At that time, I followed my instincts and followed my heart. Zhou Shengnan looked at me again. "You are really a kind person. It is rare, but unfortunately you must die here." After saying this, Zhou Shengnan fainted, and behind the main hall, there was a sparse sound. A huge black pair of pliers appeared in our field of vision, with many rough hairs. Soon, its true form appeared. It was the kind of scorpion depicted in the mural. The size of this scorpion is about the size of a car, and its tail behind is 5 or 6 meters long. At this time, a voice suddenly floated in the air, exactly the same as the tone and voice Zhou Shengnan said. "Exactly the same, buried here and become part of me, and sacrifice your life for the revival of Lulan." And the huge scorpion seemed to have heard some kind of command. It went full speed, rushed towards us. The huge pincers were waving in the air, creating a gust of wind. At this time, we don't need to consider the sound. Soldiers opened fire one after another, and several grenades were thrown. But under the scorpion's iron-clad armor, had no effect at all. Instead, a soldier was hit by a grenade reflected by the scorpion's shell, and lay on the ground moaning in pain. Instantly, I activated my ability. My mind power rushed towards the scorpion. For this kind of low-gen level animal itself have a very low brain capacity, and it is easy to control, and the mind power I emitted at this time was stronger than usual, so the scorpion couldn't bear it at all. Its head exploded directly, and slumped down limply, and the voice appeared again. But this time it seemed less calm, even a little hysterical. Why, after all these years, you won't let me go?" Hearing what the queen said, I was very confused, and I couldn't even understand it. According to the queen's words, the queen should know me, and I seem to have done something that made her very scared. "I don't remember meeting you. You must have mistaken me for someone else. Why don't you come out now and have a good meeting?" I tried to respond, to see if I could get a reply from the queen. "It is impossible. I will never forget your ability. It is because you slaughtered my people and destroyed my country." This time, the queen was screaming hysterically, and there was fear in her voice. So the Queen of Lulan judged my identity, not because of my appearance, but because of my ability. That is the Soujian called 1 year. It seems that a long time ago, someone used this ability to kill in Lulan. Maybe Lulan was destroyed because of this person. At this time, I suddenly remembered what Tang Shi said at that time. He said that I felt like an old friend of his. That is to say, everything that happened in Lulan might have been done by that old friend. The legendary Tang Shi is his old friend. At least he is a legendary figure. I'm not the person you're talking about. If you are willing to talk to me, I'm also willing to know your story. I tried to communicate with the Queen of Lulan. I wanted to know what happened in Lulan. What happened in Lulan? The Queen of Lulan gave a response. "As you wish." Then images began to appear in my mind. I knew this was the beginning of a telepathic connection. What appeared in my mind should be the memories and images of the Queen of Lulan. First, what appeared in my mind was a delicate bed. A man and a woman were fighting fiercely on the bed. From the delicate face of the woman, this should be the Queen of Lulan. And the man, as I expected, is Professor Peng, or someone who looks like Professor Peng. I don't know if it was him or his past life. Just as the two were engaged in a fierce battle, a mysterious man suddenly appeared by their bedside. "Ha ha ha, am I disturbing you?" the mysterious man said playfully. The man and woman on the bed stopped their actions and looked at the man in horror. Then the woman's fear turned into anger. "Who are you? How dare you enter my bedroom? There is an assassin." 4 guards broke in with weapons, but in almost an instant, The four men's heads burst like watermelons, and they couldn't survive. The queen also shut up. This ability is simply unheard of. Seeing this scene, the queen understood. Resistance is useless. What do you want? I am rich. I can satisfy you with whatever you want. The queen of Lulan trembled slightly. In the face of death, even the proud queen would feel fear. You have lived for so long, are you still afraid of death? Using the flesh and blood of your own people to fulfill your own path to immortality. You should have expected this day, but what I didn't expect was that guy's weapon would fall into your hands. The mysterious man said 3 sentences in a row, each of which was shocking. Queen Lulan and Professor Peng have lived for a long time, which can be said to be eternal life. Second, the price or condition for their immortality is to sacrifice their own people, Third, a weapon was found here, which surprised the mysterious man. The picture continues. The queen and Professor Peng suddenly floated up, and the mysterious man also floated up. They floated together to the top of the country. The people of Lulan Kingdom all poked their heads out, watching this scene. In the next second, almost all the civilians' heads burst like watermelons, and blood flowed like a river, and corpses everywhere. A living country suddenly became lifeless. The picture suddenly stopped. Obviously, there is still a story behind, but the Queen of Lulan didn't want me to see it. But at least one thing is confirmed. This mysterious man does indeed have the same ability as me. What is the relationship between him and me, and this mysterious man? Why? Why did he massacre all the people in Lulan? According to his words, he used the flesh and blood of his people to achieve immortality. He was very unhappy, but later, he directly killed all the people in Lulan. Isn't there some contradiction? Where is Professor Peng? Let him come out. I promise not to hurt him. I'll give the Queen of Lulan a way out. If she is willing to accept it, that would be the best. Otherwise, we can only fight to the death. At this moment, a figure slowly walked out from the back of the hall. It was no one else. It was the missing Professor Peng. Seeing Professor Peng come out, the soldiers all raised their guns. They also knew that the Professor Peng in front of them was no longer the Sojian called biologist, but a terrifying person, or a terrifying monster. Don't be so nervous. I have no hostility. I just want to talk to you. Professor Peng walked up the steps and sat down. Let's have a chat. I also have many things that I don't understand, but there is one thing I must tell you in advance. You must come back with us. This is the bottom line. I put away my gun and walked over with Gan Qi and sat beside Professor Peng. Professor Peng glanced at me and then looked at my weapon. He said lightly that heroes come from young people. I didn't expect that. Gan Qi recognized him. I knew Gan Qi. I widened my eyes in surprise. In the eyes of ordinary people, it is just an ordinary shield and axe. And Professor Peng has already revealed the true identity of Gan Qi. This also shows that Professor Peng's identity is definitely not just a lover of the Queen of Lulan. Professor Peng slowly said, my true identity is a weapon. A biological weapon. I can absorb the vitality of the living and nourish myself with the flesh and blood of the living. I can also transfer my vitality to others. Sure enough, Professor Peng's answer confirmed my guess. You said you are a weapon. Then who made you? And how to use you? I asked another question. Professor Peng chuckled. The person who created me. I can't tell you his name and I'm not qualified to say. I can only tell you. He is a legendary existence, and is also an inviolable existence. At first, I was just an ordinary soldier. I was seriously injured in a war, and was dying. That person gave me this ability, and made me his weapon, and serve him forever. Unfortunately, in the later decisive battle, the adult lost the battle, but before he failed, he sent us all out. It is said that as long as we exist, he could make a comeback one day. I immediately grasped the key point in Professor Peng's words. He said we, which means there are other weapons. I immediately raised this question. Professor Peng shook his head, indicating that he didn't know much. But one thing is certain, the weapons may be people, or a real weapon, or an object. But one thing is certain, that these weapons all have a common feature, that they can absorb vitality. After listening to Professor Peng's description, Lu Pengzi and I both focused on the trident. There is a legendary weapon here, and if there is no accident, the Japanese island also has such a weapon. Of course, it is just uncertain whether Donggying Island itself, or because the trident was there, it evolved into a weapon. Later, Professor Peng was sent to the ancient Lulan, due to living a long life, and his appearance never changed. So as time passed, Professor Peng became the god of Lulan. Because of this, the Queen of Lulan took a fancy to him, and the two gradually developed feelings for each other. Professor Peng used his power to keep the Queen of Lulan young forever. The two lived happily. Of course, the price of eternal youth is anger, which requires the flesh and blood of the living as sacrifices. Especially if the Queen of Lulan wants to stay young, it requires more consumption. So they constantly needed living people as sacrifices. The slaves they caught were quickly not enough, so they could only use the civilians of Lulan as sacrifices. But the disappearance of civilians, which quickly caused panic. But the Queen of Lulan was not a pushover. The reason why Lulan is so rich, related to a treasure. This treasure is called the Pisces Jade Pendant, which has the ability to duplicate things. Since ancient times, the Lulan kingdom used this jade pendant to duplicate gold, jewelry and so on. Then they trade these gold and jewels with the mainland to obtain the required materials. Therefore Lulan was very rich. The replication is very high, and it is hard for ordinary people to find problems. But the Queen of Lulan discovered the jade fish could also duplicate humans. Although the copied humans are a bit of a cheat, but they also have the memories of the copied person. The only problem is that the fresh meat of the replicated human cannot be used. After all, it is just an empty shell. But first, copy a living person, replace the living person with the duplicate, and then use the living as sacrifices, which is very suitable. So for hundreds of years Professor Peng and the Queen of Lulan killed countless people, or how many people they had replicated, until the arrival of the mysterious man. It turned out that the mysterious man wanted to kill all the people in Lulan, maybe because he couldn't tell who was a replicant, so he just killed them all. So when you met the mysterious man, why didn't he kill you? Logically, destroying you, wouldn't it stop all this? I raised my question. Professor Peng didn't give me a positive answer. I don't know either, but he said something. He said that for the sake of my master, he spared my life, but within 2000 years, I couldn't return here. It seems that the mysterious man and the master mentioned by Professor Peng, or even very familiar. Professor Peng continued to tell the story. Although the mysterious man didn't kill Professor Peng, he was not so polite to the Queen of Lulan. He didn't completely kill the Queen of Lulan, but used some unknown method to destroy the Queen's vitality, only leaving a thread of life. I killed him, but I didn't kill him completely. I'll give you a chance. You can come back after 2000 years. If you still love him by then, you should be able to save him. After saying this, the mysterious man disappeared. Professor Peng properly preserved the body, and left Lulan according to the agreement. In the next 2000 years, Professor Peng lived in various identities. Anyway, he can live forever. He can absorb the flesh and blood of others. So in history there have been many strange death cases, such as a family suddenly turning into mummies. Professor Peng was responsible for these cases, and in this era the 2000 year period has finally arrived. He also had a legitimate reason to go to Lopner, to find and resurrect the Queen of Lulan. In these more than 2000 years, Professor Peng also found his answer. 2000 years, he still loves the Queen of Lulan. We all know what happened later. Professor Peng used the name of scientific expedition. First found the ruins of Lulan to attract everyone, but he found that to resurrect the Queen of Lulan, he needed too much vitality. So he originally wanted to use the Pisces Jade Pendant and slowly achieve his goal, just like what he did in Lulan Kingdom before. But times have changed. The modern communication and imaging technologies have been so developed. The matter of cloning people quickly attracted attention, but it was all solved by a nuclear bomb. Professor Peng had no choice. He could only secretly absorb vitality nationwide and stored in his body. This means that there were many clones in the country, but their families were unaware of it. I suddenly remembered, I have also received reports in recent years. Some people suddenly became very light, people who originally weighed over 50 kilograms, but their daily lives were not affected at all. So it seems that these people might be clones. There is another question. Why two girls would become the appearance of the Queen of Lulan? Professor Peng thought for a moment, and answered me frankly. When I poured all my anger into it, I found that Xuanyu couldn't be resurrected directly. There must be a medium. It seems that the name of the Queen of Lulan is Xuanyu. So you use these two girls as the medium. I clenched against qi. I was angry. Yes, I've killed so many people for Xuanyu. I don't care about killing two more people. Professor Feng was still calm. Finally, he told me he thought only one medium was needed, but maybe because the Queen of Lulan used the Pisces Jade Pendant too many times, her own soul was also replicated. So he must find two media to resurrect the souls of the duplicates, so that the original can be complete. So as long as you hand over those two girls to me, I will tell you some more secrets. I'll trade these secrets for our lives. How about we promise never to set foot in the Central Plains, and there will never be a replication of people? Professor Peng finally stated the final condition. I shook my head, but my hand was already on the dry lacquer. I can't hand over the two girls to you, and you must go back with me, but I can guarantee your safety. How about it? After hearing my words, Professor Peng, his eyes became sharp, and his face became hideous. I seem to be underestimated. You are not the same person as before. Don't refuse the toast. You regret. Don't eat the toast, and you'll drink the penalty. Fatih Liu next to me raised his hand and shot, which accurately hit Professor Peng's head, and directly hit the top of his head, and blood gushed out. Professor Peng also showed a painful expression. It seems that even if he lives forever, pain is inevitable, but obviously a bullet couldn't take his life. There must be enough vitality stored in his body. His wound quickly healed, and even the broken bones were mended perfectly. It seems that you didn't. Before Professor Peng finished speaking, his head exploded like a watermelon. It was shattered beyond recognition. When his wound started to heal, I activated my ability. I turned it to the highest gear. I attacked him by surprise. This attack was very effective. Although Professor Peng's head had been blown up like this, his body was still twitching. Obviously he wasn't dead, and he could still speak. I don't know where the voice came from. You all must die. As Professor Peng finished speaking, I suddenly felt a wave of nausea, and a sense of inexplicable palpitations. This feeling is hard to describe. It is a bit like being drunk. A light and empty feeling, like my body is being drained. I immediately understood. Professor Peng was strongly absorbing our vitality and flesh. At this moment, a relatively weak soldier had already fallen to the ground, fell to the ground. Duanfeng was staggering, and was about to collapse. I could also feel the strength in my body was rapidly draining. My movements were a little stiff. Just as I was thinking of a solution, a heart-wrenching scream filled the entire space. I looked up. Lu Pengzi somehow had already slipped to Professor Peng's side. The trident was inserted straight into Professor Peng's chest, and Professor Peng was obviously in great pain. I could feel that. The trident was sucking Professor Peng's life force. Professor Peng's skin quickly became loose. From a middle-aged man who looked relatively robust, he quickly turned into a white-haired old man. A few seconds later, his eyes had sunk deeply, and even his teeth fell out. Professor Peng stopped moving. I walked over carefully. I felt his pulse and heartbeat had disappeared. This man, who has lived for over 2,000 years, was finally completely dead. It seems that the same weapon, the trident's priority, is much higher than Professor Peng. It directly cut off his vitality. I quickly went to check on the fainted soldier, and Duanfeng. His heart was beating fast, which are similar to the symptoms of hypoglycemia, but their vital signs were stable. There should be no danger. I breathed a sigh of relief, and turned my attention to Xia Lanying and Zhou Shengnian. The faces of the two girls returned to their original selves. The next thing was to find the Queen of Lulan, but I was still worried. So I asked a soldier to carry Professor Peng's body, and went out first. Lu Pengzi and I continued to move forward. We need to find the still-alive Queen of Lulan, to see whether to kill her or take her away. Before we knew it, we had reached the end of a room. This room is very different from other rooms. The most intuitive feeling is that this room was heavily cynicized, no longer has a strong exotic style. And on the innermost side of this room, there is a big bed. It is the ancient high-footed double bed. Such a bed is impossible to exist in the western regions. It is a typical import. So there should be a Han living here, or this is the room where the Queen of Lulan and Professor Peng lived. I walked carefully to the front of the big bed. I finally saw the true face of the Queen of Lulan. Although I have never seen the Queen of Lulan, but I'm sure that it was her lying on the bed. At this time, the Queen of Lulan lying on the bed was a skeleton. The only difference is that this skeleton still has a black and shiny hair, which looked very strange. I gently called out. The skeleton didn't respond. So I looked at this empty skull. I activated my ability. I invaded the skull's brain with my mind power. In this world, I finally saw. I'm not highly educated. I really can't describe a woman. I can only say that she is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. No wonder Professor Peng, who has lived for thousands of years, would be fascinated by her. When he saw me, was first surprised, and then started screaming hysterically, "You killed him! You killed him! Yes, we killed him! Yes, we killed him!" What he did, he deserved to die 100 times, I replied coldly. Although she was a beautiful woman, I couldn't arouse my sympathy at all. On the contrary, I even hated the woman in front of me. For her own love, and to be with others forever, she deprived others of their lives, and even created a duplicate. Such an unethical thing. Let's talk. Let's talk about the person who made you like this. What is going on? I started to try to communicate with him, to see if I could find any information. Queen Lulan sneered. He is a monster. He has no mercy in his heart, and I feel that he made me like this, just for fun. When he was killing, we immediately organized a counterattack, but he seemed to be invulnerable and immortal. We were no match for him. He alone destroyed a country. Such a person is simply a devil. After shouting so many words in one breath, it seemed to have exhausted all the strength of the queen. She was panting heavily, and even collapsed directly on the ground. I shook my head. I was about to leave. I suddenly felt a faint pull. I looked down. I saw the Queen of Lulan was lying in front of me, holding my trouser leg, crying, and said to me, "Please kill me, and then bury me with her." At that moment, I was really moved. I've heard of love that spans thousands of years before. I didn't expect that. I really met it. What kind of love that can make these two people love each other for thousands of years, but never deteriorated? Professor Peng has always lived in the midst of human life, but never forgot the Queen of Lulan because of the courtesan. The Queen of Lulan only has a skeleton left. Only a little vitality remained. But all used to miss Professor Peng. I didn't answer the Queen of Lulan, but I removed my supernatural ability and returned to the real world. Looking at the bones in front of me, I shook my head. I'm sorry, I can't agree. Professor Peng's body must be taken back, and the Queen of Lulan's remaining body must be taken back. There are secrets of immortality, and the secret of the copy, and all of this is what the highest interest needs. At this moment, a jade pendant engraved with two fish is hanging around the neck of the Queen of Lulan. Without a doubt, this is the twin fish jade pendant. On the way back, I can feel that the Queen of Lulan's vitality is getting less and less. It seems that the Lulan ruins are very helpful. Now that we have left the Lulan ruins, it is hard to say whether she can make it back. There is no way. We can only increase the speed of our march. There is nothing else we can do. When we returned to the 70-4-9 Bureau, the Lulan Queen's vitality has been exhausted. Even so, she was also rushed to the laboratory, trying to obtain the last bit of data and information. Professor Peng's body was also sealed and preserved, and classified as top secret. The Pisces Jade Pendant was also sealed with the most rigorous means, mainly because we don't know how to use it. In case someone inside the Bureau of 749, it would be a terrifying thing. In addition, the exact location of the Lulan Kingdom was also confirmed. Next, there will be a professional archaeological team to explore. However, that is not something we should consider. It has to be said that the scientific research ability of Bureau 749. After we came back, it was only about a week later. One night, a death row inmate was secretly transported to the yard. The death row inmate was in a closed laboratory, looked very cramped and very uneasy. Obviously, he didn't know what was waiting for him. After a while, I seemed to feel the air in the room vibrating, but this feeling was very slight. The death row inmate inside didn't notice this. Meanwhile, a shadow gradually formed beside the death row inmate. Slowly, the shadow was gradually filled, forming a human figure. Then the outline, facial features, and even clothing appeared. A copy was thus born. The death row inmate looked at the duplicate in horror. He found that it was himself. Whether it was his appearance, posture, or even his clothing, are exactly the same as his current appearance. The only difference is that this duplicate person looked a little dull and a cold expression. The death row inmate was a little frantic. He pushed the duplicate on the ground. Normally, with such force, would only push an ordinary person to stagger, but the copy was directly pushed against the wall and fell softly to the ground. At this time, the death row inmate looked at the copy of himself. His expression was already full of madness. With the death row inmate being secretly detained, the duplicate was also collected. But in the middle, the duplicate and the original will undergo many experiments, including cell comparison, function checks, memory screening, and so on. I'm not very interested in these, but one thing is certain, that the first copy of a human being appeared. Whether it is the replicant or the original, they can't leave the compound of Bureau 749. It is worth mentioning that after the Lop Nur operation ended, the Bureau 749 launched a large scale investigation of clones. The clones mainly manifested as lighter weight and duller mental state. And there are many clones, perhaps. There are still clones lurking around you and me.